So most people live in loops that they don't understand. And they call that lack of understanding of the loops that they live in, they call that inconsistency. They say, oh, I can't stick to anything. And I told myself that for a really long time. But the real pattern is actually deeper and kind of dumber. They swing between extremes because they've never built a life designed to actually hold tension, right? They think because they can't, they think that because they feel a tension in their lives that they're doing something wrong, right? That discipline and chaos aren't signs of progress or failure. This is a mindset shift that you need to have. Discipline is not a sign of progress per se. Chaos is not a sign of failure per se. These are what are called polarities. And one gives shape, one gives force. Discipline gives shape, chaos gives force. Both are necessary. But unmanaged, they create a collapse. If you're pursuing a balance between discipline and chaos, you're always going to feel never disciplined enough and like there's too much chaos. But if you see each of these aspects as polarities in your life to be managed, where the energy of your life is oscillating between discipline and chaos, and this oscillation is what gives you the life force, the energy to move forward in life. This is a mindset shift. So unmanaged, if you're not able to manage that oscillation between discipline and chaos, things typically tend to collapse first with your mindset, first with your mental fortitude, because you feel so dejected and discouraged. But if you learn to manage that flow and not to stigmatize yourself for chaos and not to judge yourself for not having enough discipline, then they create a rhythm. And that rhythm is what gives you power over time. So what I want to do is actually apply this to 10 core life domains. And the reason I want to apply this, it sounds like a lot, is because that's where we tend to feel overwhelmed. At least that's where I have always tended to feel overwhelmed in my life, is that I feel like, people talk about this concept of adulting, right? Oh, I'm adulting. It's like, right, that's good. But if you were to create a checklist or a series of domains or a series of buckets into which you put all of the responsibilities of life that you would call adulting, what would those buckets be? And if you could kind of check off, I'm doing good enough in this area, this area, this area, and this area, then I get the peace of mind that I'm covering all my bases. Not because I've eradicated chaos from my life in all of these domains of life, but because I've learned to manage the oscillation, the flow of discipline and chaos in these domains. So the first is physical health, right? Of our 10 domains, the first is physical health, in which we exercise this concept of polarity management, right? So this isn't about steps or sets or exercises or counting your macros or anything, right? So what does order look like in physical health? Order is predictable stimulus over time, and chaos is biological volatility. It's stress, it's adaptation, it's transformation. And we think discipline gets you fit, but discipline without volatility creates stasis. The body adapts to what it can predict. So real health isn't just repeating. It's learning to oscillate predictably between structure and strain. Health mastery is not being consistent all the time. It's really learning to recover from intensity in a controlled loop. And here, the deeper truth is the body is a memory system. It encodes expectation. It doesn't respond to effort. It responds to difference. And there's this ancient concept called hormesis, this beneficial stress that applies here, right? A body that only obeys order becomes ornamental, right? A body that only knows chaos becomes injured. And so health is not the absence of pain, it's the capacity to absorb and impact without losing form. So that's kind of how I see polarity management in physical health. In mental health, it's a little different. So polarity often I find to be emotional containment versus emotional rupture. And again, polarity management is about saying both of these things are inevitable and essential to this domain of life. So order is really the ability to name and regulate and metabolize emotion. Chaos is the willingness to let go of control and allow an internal collapse. Some people repress. And you see this in therapy a lot, where you have a bias towards order. So therapy will say, oh, we would like to bring you to a place of balance. But balance is not compatible with with polarity management, because balance implies that you are resolving or neutralizing the energy of the polarity. Whereas polarity management accepts there's order and chaos, right? So some people repress, others disintegrate. But mental strength is not composure. It's not stoicism, it's elasticity. You need protocols for your inner storms. You also need the ability to let yourself break without losing the frame. So real mental health is the ability to enter emotional chaos without abandoning yourself. And if you look deeper, you see that even the Stoics, they didn't say don't feel. They said learn to respond to feeling. And emotion is a signal, not a threat. The goal isn't resolution, but integration. You are not meant to feel good. You are meant to feel real, and that feels good. So the third domain, we've got physical health, mental health. The third domain is work. Or I actually, work is like showing up to my job. I like to call it craft, right? So the polarity in the craft domain of your life is industrial repetition versus creative instability. So polarity management in craft is order is repeatable systems that compound, and chaos is like surges of obsession and innovation and destructive insight. And discipline builds companies. Chaos invents products. You have to run the factory and blow up the model without losing grip on either. So don't fear destruction, but try to schedule it if you can. That's how I kind of look at polarity management, at least in my life, right? And what's really happening here is that work isn't just output, it's self-definition through struggle. The Greeks called this ergon, this work, this purpose embedded in doing. But without this, without the contrast of ergon, this agon, the contest, unpredictability, ergon becomes lifeless, right? Creation must flirt with undoing. And every act of craft is also an act of self-refinement. So that's, again, we're thinking about, in terms of craft, we think about control, but we also think about creativity. And it's not about them competing with one another, right? But their polarity and the energy flow between them being orchestrated in a way that cultivates a forward movement, right? So the fourth domain in life that we have to exercise polarity management is money. So in financial realm of our lives, polarity management is basically preservation versus leverage. So order would be wealth preservation, consistency, predictability, and chaos would be like asymmetric bets and entrepreneurship and upside exposure. And some people hoard, some people gamble. Both are fear-based. Build order as your base financially and use chaos to accelerate. Financial freedom is not peace. It's risk insulated by infrastructure. Because at its core, money is stored choice. It's also stored fear. Because order tries to make the future predictable, chaos acknowledges that the future is not predictable. The wise build order so they can afford chaos. That's how I see polarity management in the financial domain of life. The fifth domain is love or intimacy. So polarity here would really be nervous system safety versus erotic uncertainty. So order is reliability, presence, and structure, and chaos is vulnerability, polarity, erotic unpredictability. Too much order and love becomes co-working. Too much chaos, and it becomes a trauma reenactment. So you have to make it safe enough to break, but also wild enough to awaken. And intimacy demands something rare, which is really the ability to be held and kind of shaken up. And safety without mystery kills polarity. But chaos without containment destroys trust. And a sacred bond holds while being shaken, right? This is the polarity management of love and intimacy. The sixth domain is friendship or kinship, or what you might call brotherhood or sisterhood or tribe. The polarity here is ritual versus battle. So order in kinship or in friendship would be shared rhythms, loyalty, tradition, and chaos would be shared risk or friction or an honest rupture. And friendship needs both. Without tradition, it drifts, and without fire, it never goes deep. Friendship really isn't built at dinner. It's forged in tension over time. Community without ordeal is just theater. And I think everybody feels that superficiality, and there's something distasteful about that. But friendship is shared memory under pressure. And the tribe must survive conflict and celebration to be legitimized. The seventh domain in which you exercise polarity management is learning. So in learning, it's really structure versus disorientation. So order in your self-education or becoming an autodidact is epistemic clarity, or clarity about how you know what you know, frameworks, and synthesis. Chaos in learning is obsession and disruption and ego death and the beginner's mindset. Because most memorize or drift, and wisdom lives in a structured disassembly where you're climbing your knowledge until it breaks. So what you want to do to exercise polarity management in your learning domain of life is to build scaffolding and climb it and let it snap. And have the humility to undergo ego death and then rebuild higher, right? And this is what learning really means, to die and to reincarnate in place, right? I have a self-conception, and I'm allowing that to be completely reinvented. So real knowledge is ego disruption inside strong containers, and you must leave the map to update it. The eighth domain of life would be spirituality and meaning, where the polarity here is sacred frame versus sacred collapse. So order in spirituality or meaning would be ritual or worldview or liturgy, and chaos would be ego death or mystical disintegration. And people cling to dogma or they chase disillusion. But meaning is something you fuse from collapse and coherence. The spiritual life is not peace. It's sacred disintegration inside sacred frames. Faith without some collapse is just superstition. And then it becomes no longer even the domain of the spiritual. But collapse without a frame, that's just despair. And you need a myth strong enough to hold your breakdown and subjective enough to be reframed and rewritten. The ninth domain of your life is environment. So the polarity of environment is containment versus aesthetic entropy. So order here would be cleanliness and reduction and control. And chaos would be texture and movement and wildness. And too much order deadens the nervous system, and too much chaos scrambles cognition. So your space should really calm your chaos and wake up your senses, right? Because your environment scripts your behavior. And the goal is not minimalism, it's meaningful contrast. It's grammar and it's poetry in one room, in one space. You want to bring that with you to wherever you are. And the 10th domain of your life is time and attention. And the polarity that you have to manage here is structure versus surrender. This is really difficult for people who really want control. Order in the domain of time and attention equals a calendar, a schedule, a constraint, an execution, time blocking. And chaos is drift and Sabbath and timeless focus and play, right? People tend to over-optimize or disappear, and both kind of miss the point, right? Time doesn't need to be optimized. It needs to be sacralized, because attention is worship, and order gives continuity. Chaos gives revelation. This is the polarity management. A life of wisdom knows when to constrain and when to wander in terms of time and attention, and how to manage the flow of both. So the final frame that I want to give you here is that if you're swinging between extremes, you're not broken. You were just taught to choose balance as a value when life was never designed to be balanced. Life is meant to oscillate intentionally. So harness polarity, not react to it. Build systems that stretch without breaking, that accommodate and expect flow and chaos and discipline, and place a premium on both. Because the goal isn't optimization. It's rhythm. It's strength. It's building a life that can hold your full self without collapse.